valuable from both of these services. So at this time, we're going to play 2 videos, and I also have a written statement that I'm going to read from Representative McGovern, from Representative Wilson, as well as Representative Keating. So I'll go ahead and cue those so that we can listen to them.
Thank you to the Hudson Institute for inviting me to offer remarks at your event on Radio Free Asia and Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. I am glad that you are focusing on these vital broadcast services because they do matter. They are important to my work. As the former chair of the Congressional Executive Commission on China, I can testify to the value of Radio Free Asia, a lifeline for those silenced by censorship. There are 319 citations to RFA in the Commission's most recent report, covering forced labor in Xinjiang, verdicts against human rights lawyers, and Tibetan monks who escaped China's state-run boarding schools. Now let's be clear. This is information that we can't get anywhere else. RFA journalists are a key to understanding the region. And I worry about the quality of the CECC's work if RFA goes away. I worry we will be dangerously less informed. I think of the staff of RFA's Uyghur language service who bravely continued their work even when Chinese authorities locked up their relatives to punish them. These people are now out of jobs. They are unable to tell stories from their homeland. Our own government is adding to the suffering inflicted by the Chinese government. The same can be said of RFE, RL. They expose abuses with authoritarian regimes in Eurasia that Eurasia wants to hide. Fareed Mehralizadeh is an RFE-RL journalist jailed by Azerbaijan for simply doing his job. I've advocated for his release. As Hudson wrote in its recent report, I quote, "If the U.S. government shuts down RFE-RL and RFA, authoritarian states will fill the void with propaganda. In fact, they are already doing so," end quote. Fortunately, Congress is rejecting the cuts. The appropriations bill that passed the House last week includes $166 million combined for RFA and RFE-RL. In my work on the CECC and the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission, I always emphasize the need to listen to the voices of people in the countries that we are trying to help. RFA and RFE-RL amplify these voices like no one else can. These agencies are critical to our policymaking. They serve America's interests. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, friends of truth and the extraordinary Hudson Institute, I am Joe Wilson, member of Congress representing the people of the 2nd District of South Carolina. I'm grateful to be addressing you at this important event to recognize why Radio Free Asia and Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty matter for America. We are in a battle that we did not choose between democracies of rule of law being invaded by dictatorships with rule of gun. Our adversaries, war criminal Putin, the Chinese Communist Party, the Iranian regime, North Korea, and Cuba, are working together more than ever before cooperating to fight against democracies. In this fight, while military strength is so important, we should never underestimate the power of information and truth. These murderous regimes are terrified that their people will know of truth about what's going on, which is why the Iranian regime and others work to completely shut down the internet. Our adversaries run their own global propaganda networks based on lies, such as Russia Today television network, which has made inroads building popular support by brainwashing people around the world. Radio Free Asia and Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, have been the tip of the spear in the fight against our dictator adversaries. During the Cold War, they gave millions of citizens access to alternative viewpoints and news that communist states repressed. We had Radio Free Asia and Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty broadcasts contributed to the ideological erosion of communist control for many dissidents and future leaders, including former Czech President Václav Havel. It served as a vital source of uncensored ideas and encouragement to resist authoritarian narratives. At the same time, American public diplomacy efforts require an update for the 21st century. We cannot fight the information battle of today in the age of social media and alternative intelligence with the same exact tools of the Cold War. In Congress, I have pushed to strengthen and reform our international broadcasting efforts by focusing on social media, internet access, public-private cooperation, and prohibiting taxpayers from providing an open platform for our adversaries. At the same time, while reform is needed, I am grateful to continue the support of institutions like Radio Free Asia and Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, which are the tip of the spear in the fight against dictatorial propaganda. I am grateful for the extraordinary Hudson Institute for hosting this event and commend Radio Free Asia and Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, for their ongoing efforts to provide peace through strength by telling the truth.
And we have one more statement from Congressman Bill Keating. Good morning, everyone. I'm Congressman Bill Keating from Massachusetts, and I've had the honor of being the longtime lead Democrat on the House Subcommittee on Europe. Thank you very much to the Hudson Institute for inviting me to deliver remarks on the importance of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. In my time leading the democratic priorities of the Europe Subcommittee, I have worked tirelessly to reinforce the transatlantic relationship. Those of us who work on these issues, including the journalists faithfully reporting the news, understand that the United States and Europe are better when they work together. We are better positioned to take advantage of the opportunities in front of us, as well as to combat our shared adversaries. When we work closely, our shared values are promoted, our economies are strengthened, and we advance democratic values to the benefit of all society. The Trump administration has threatened our longstanding alliance, and as a result, we are all waiting with bated breath to see how much stress our transatlantic relationship can truly take. Right now, the best way we can do to reduce the stress is promoting and protecting the foundational values of our alliance, and no organization is more central to this mission than Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. For 75 years, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty has provided uncensored, trusted news to those who lack the right and the privilege of a free press. It has reported on the Cuban Missile Crisis, the fall of the Berlin Wall, the September 11th attacks, and today the ongoing protests in Iran. Through good and bad, monumental and mundane, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, and its sister organizations, Radio Free Asia and Middle East Broadcasting Network, have shown the power of a free press to inform global populations about their world. As all here know, the foundational public service is under threat, and that threat is global. No country or continent is immune from as bad actors intentionally spread fake news, and those in power denigrate journalists and attack an institution that is an essential pillar of democracy. Meanwhile, this administration has taken an axe to the U.S. Agency for Global Media and funding for Radio Free Europe and others, using American taxpayer dollars to provide Americans with their right to access free and independent journalism is a noble and just cause, and it is a cause that I will continue to support in Congress and throughout my role in public service. Events like this are essential for advocating on behalf of Radio Free Europe, and I again want to thank the executives, journalists, and those who risk their lives every day to bring the news to all of us. I know here at Hudson we are very grateful for the congressional support for Radio Free Asia and Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. And in fact, I was truly amazed by how many members, even though they weren't able to come today, had expressed continued support on both sides of the aisle. It's clear that this is a bipartisan cause and that this is something that Congress cares deeply about. As Representative McGovern noted in his own comments, there's continued and ongoing support from Congress, with appropriations already passing through the House and now awaiting passage in the Senate in order to provide funding actually through a line item, which was something that Alexis and I suggested and supported in our own paper for both Radio Free Asia and for Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty. So many thanks to the members for their statements of support. I'm now going to turn to the testimonial part of our conversation today, and I would like to invite Hyun-Seung Lee to join me here up on stage. I'm going to read his bio very quickly. Hyun-Seung Lee is a North Korean escapee, the lead strategist at the Global Peace Foundation, and the founder of North Korean Young Leaders Assembly, with prior experience in North Korea's shipping and mining sectors and as a sergeant in the DPRK Army Special Force. He fled in 2014 due to severe governmental purges. He holds a bachelor's degree in economics from Dunbay University of Finance and Economics and a master's degree in public administration from Columbia University. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Hyun-Seung to join me here on the stage.
Oh, thank you, Olivia. Thank you, Hudson Institute, hosting this wonderful, important event. And I'd like to thank all the distinguished panelists who joined this critical discussion today. As Olivia mentioned, my name is Hyun-Seung Lee. I lived as a North Korean for about 3 decades before defecting in 2014. There was a good news a few days ago. The Radio Free Asia's Korean service has partially resumed operation. I think it seems like your efforts are bearing fruit, and I want to congratulate all of you on this. Many audience in this room and online probably don't fully grasp how Radio Free Asia and other outside information actually affects North Korean citizens. Today, I hope my personal experience can help illustrate this. I also want explain why Radio Free Asia matters to U.S. national security and how it contributes to it. In 2005, I was in the North Korean military special force. One day, I was mobilized to renovating our training facility with some peers. And then, since we are not the construction soldiers, we invited 2 specialists from the construction unit. And then we worked together for several days. We became friends. And then one day, the conversation turned into South Korean dramas. We bragged each other how many South Korean dramas we watched together. And then the construction unit guy suddenly said that story stopped me cold. Like, he said that I was listening to the radio and I heard that in South Korea there was a company called Samsung, and this company asset was more than $50 billion. Can you imagine that one company was $15 billion? I immediately shot back. That's a lie. Do you even know how much $50 billion is? Our entire country makes less than $5 billion in a year. You're telling me one company has $50 billion in asset? That doesn't make any sense. You must have heard wrong. He insisted. No, I definitely heard it on Radio Free Asia. They said Samsung is a company with a net worth of $50 billion. I got angry. That's false propaganda from CIA and the South Korean region. And you believe it? And then he pushed back. Most of what Radio Free Asia reports is true. They even cover internal news from different regions in North Korea. And a lot of it's true. You don't see that type of internal news from North Korean newspaper, do you? So I got even angry, more upset. That's exactly how the enemy's psychological warfare works. They mix truth with lies to brainwash you. So the conversation stopped. But I genuinely thought he was stupid. Because at the time, my father was head of one of North Korea's largest company, and I knew that the company annual revenue was only about $100 and $200 million. So $50 billion seems absolutely ridiculous to me. But then, at the end of 2005, I was discharging from the military. I was able to study in China. And after searching several days on internet, I saw the Samsung ads on internet. I immediately recalled our conversation. I searched it, and it was true. It was $50 billion. And at the moment, I felt genuinely embarrassed. I felt terrible about getting angry at my friend. That stupid one was not him, it was me. Here's another story. The first time I actually saw a Radio Free Asia article was surprisingly through a North Korean publication. One day when I came home, I noticed a small booklet with the words reference newspaper printed on it. When I asked my father about it, he told me that this was foreign news material distributed only to the highest-ranking officials, people who directly appointed by Kim Jong-il, North Korean leader. Inside the booklet were articles from Radio Free Asia, Voice of America, CNN, and BBC. Among them was an article about, I still remember, the article about how North Korea's food production has fallen short due to the natural disaster and needed for the foreign aid by RFA. And my father told me that He didn't even know how much food production of North Korea real number was. He only knew that after reading this article, he learned that what's North Korea's actual food production amount, because North Korean regime never published the truth. For North Korean elites, this newspaper and this Radio Free Asia and the Voice of America articles were a small window to the outside world. Ultimately, Radio Free Asia was providing North Korean citizens not just with outside information, but with information about North Korea itself, information that even North Korean regime never reports. Now, what I want to emphasize next is Radio Free Asia and Voice of America don't just provide information to its citizens. They will play a critical role in the U.S. national security as well. The truth is, there are many media outlets that specialize in covering North Korea's internal affairs, like Radio Free Asia's Korean service does. There are some small platforms, but in terms of funding and infrastructure, nothing matches Radio Free Asia. During the months when RFA and VOA were shut down, the amount of analysis and internal news about North Korea dropped dramatically. And what filled that void wasn't South Korean media. It was North Korea's the propaganda outlets. Various online platforms were flooded with North Korean propaganda videos and genuine North Korean footage without any explanation. The footage only showcased the glorious side of North Korea. Without accurate analysis and interpretation of North Korea, people consuming this content weren't critical of the regime. Instead, they believe Western media was destroying North Korea. If you go to the famous platform called Reddit, you will find it full of North Korean sympathizers. When I post an article criticizing North Korea, they swarmed in. They're showing me North Korean state media and claiming my testimony is false. They say Radio Free Asia is lying and it's run by CIA. And exactly what I concerns the most. As an objective information and journalism about North Korea decreases, the information environment we encounter about North Korea will be replaced by North Korean narratives. Over time, as North Korean propaganda dominates online space, the information environment we'll face in the future will pose a serious threat to the U.S. national security. 10 or 20 years from now, when a new generation of experts analyze North Korea, the information and AI data they encounter will portray North Korea and its dictator as far less threatening than we understand them today. Flawed information and misinformation can lead to serious errors in judgment, mistakes in national security. We can't let that environment develop, but if we give up Radio Free Asia and Voice of America, we abandon good citizens of Asia to the tyrannies of hostile nations and dictators like North Korea, Iran, and CCP. I want to close my remarks with this sentence: when truth falls silent, tyranny thrives. Thank you.
Many thanks to Hyun-Seung for offering that both at times funny but also very serious testimony. We really appreciate that. We're now going to hear virtually from Victoria Andrukovich. She's a Belarusian human rights activist currently based in Lithuania due to political persecution in her home country. She has extensive experience working with human rights organizations, NGOs, and various political and civic campaigns, both in Belarus and abroad. Currently, she leads the Belarus program at the Dialogue Office for Civil Society Cooperation, Dialogue Bureau, Vienna. So without further ado, Vika, I will turn it to you. Thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Olivia. Many thanks to the Hudson Institute for organizing this event and raising such an important topic. As you get to know, I'm from Belarus. It's a country with a long-standing, persistent autocracy where people are persecuted for their views and punished with horrific prison terms for such innocent things as a comment on the internet. Since childhood, I've been surrounded by this authoritarian system that systematically oppresses its own citizens and fed them lies. And free media, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty in particular, was the only window of truth that allowed people to break through the information iron curtain created by the regimes in the region, whether it was Kremlin regime or Lukashenko regime. And unfortunately, the situation didn't change much for many of our countries, and Belarusian regime actually evolved, and it's evolved from authoritarian to totalitarian. It got more violent, more technological advance in terms of blocking people access to any external information. And I'm not speaking here just about blocking the internet and messengers, persecution of journalists and free media, labeling them as extremists and terrorists, which became actually a norm in our societies. But I'm speaking about more complex, sophisticated tools and mechanisms of control of the public opinion and citizens' obedience to the system. These days, they're using AI-powered internet censorship systems, facial recognition, surveillance of activists with brand new high-tech super apps and more. Unfortunately, these regimes, they're getting stronger and stronger, and they spare no resources on their propaganda machine. For example, the cost of the Russian state media has reached record highs as of 2026. The official number is over $1.5 billion USA dollars, and it's only funding of the state media channels, while Kremlin continues to spread and influence through hidden propaganda tools, such as funding patriotic blogs, video games, TV shows, influencers, content on TikTok, and many more. And I'm not even speaking about influence in other countries where Russia is trying to actively intervene into media space and manipulate public opinion. A lot of people these days are talking about wars, and there is indeed a horrible full-scale war in the middle of Europe, in Ukraine right now. But not many people speak about information war that is going on the background of all of that. It is a war for people's hearts and minds, which is not less important. And perhaps if we could win this information war, the likelihood of real wars breaking out would be significantly reduced. And I think Radio Liberty here is a very good example. It played a crucial role during the Cold War times, and I believe it was one of the main tools that cracked the Iron Curtain, proving that truth and freedom are stronger than barbed wire and regime walls. At that time, Belarus was part of the Soviet Union, another oppressive and violent regime, and Radio Free Europe was basically one of the only sources of truth that people had secret access to. And even my mom told me stories from her youth, how they got together with friends to listen Radio Liberty undercover, to learn at least something about the world outside USSR, to learn about what is actually going on. I believe Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, was one of the strong triggers for the Soviet Republic to start the fight for independence and freedom. Unfortunately, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, my country was unlucky and fell into hands of yet another dictator. And Radio Liberty remains a vital source of independent, truthful information, and often the only window to freedom and democracy for Belarusian people and all other nations trapped into a completely state-controlled autocratic system. In 1989, the Berlin Wall fell, and it wasn't just because of the military might. It was because people on the other side knew the truth, thanks to American-funded broadcasting and independent media. Unfortunately, today the stakes are just as high. That's why I think it's very important to continue funding of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, to continue this ongoing struggle for hearts and minds of people all over the world. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Vika. And I'd like to invite our panelists to join me here. Thank you, Vika. Did you stand on that? Yeah, sorry. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce everybody that we have up here. Thank you so much for joining, everyone. So my co-moderator is going to be Alexis Moracek today. She's the Senior Program Manager of the Human Rights and Freedom Program at the McCain Institute at Arizona State University. Prior to joining the McCain Institute, Alexis was at IRI for many years. And then Alexis and I also got to work together at the Heritage Foundation for many years too. So I'm really delighted to both have had her as a co-author, but also now to have her as a co-moderator for today's discussion. I'm also going to introduce Bei Fong, who is the president and CEO of Radio Free Asia, where she oversees award-winning journalism with the mission of bringing free press to closed societies in Asia. She spent most of her career in print journalism, working for U.S. News and World Report, first as the Beijing bureau chief and then as a war correspondent, covering the conflicts in Afghanistan and Iraq. Upon returning to the U.S., she became the diplomatic correspondent for the Chicago Tribune. Before joining RFA, she served in government as a Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Press and Public Diplomacy. Ms. Fong earned her undergraduate degree at Harvard University, was a visiting fellow at Oxford University, and a Fulbright Scholar in Hong Kong. She trained as a French chef at Le Cordon Bleu in Paris and holds a brown belt in Kung Fu. That is such a fun factoid. I absolutely love that. And I'm also delighted to welcome Lisa Curtis, who is the director of the Indo-Pacific Security Program at the Center for New American Security. With over 20 years of service in the U.S. government, her work centers on U.S. policy toward the Indo-Pacific and South and Central Asia. Curtis served as Deputy Assistant to the President and National Security Council Senior Director for South and Central Asia from 2017 to 2021. She previously served as Senior Fellow on South Asia at the Heritage Foundation, where we got to work together, and at the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, State Department, Central Intelligence Agency, and at the U.S. embassies in both Islamabad and New Delhi. Curtis has served as board chair for Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty since August 2024. Lisa, I'm so excited to have you here. Lisa has been a long-term mentor for me and Bei. It's just absolutely wonderful to have you here as well. So we're gonna now turn it over to a fireside chat format for us to discuss. And the first question is to both of you. So last March, as we've been talking about throughout this program, the Trump administration issued an executive order to close USAGM. Can you each talk about how that impacted RFA and RFE respectively?
Yeah, certainly. So directly following the executive order, we got a letter from USAGM saying that our grant was terminated, and we were directed to use the existing funds that we had to do an orderly shutdown. So we, basically immediately pivoted to trying to protect our journalists. We did have to scale back in a cash conservation mode in order to stay afloat while we went to court to try to get our funds. And just to correct the record, we actually only paused broadcasting for a few weeks during the government shutdown. We were, USAGM actually told us that they were shutting down our access to any radio transmissions immediately after the grant termination letter. So we weren't able to broadcast on the radio, but we did do digital content the entire time, just on a very scaled back way. But it was devastating. I mean, as you say, we had experienced reporters who had to find other means of making a livelihood, and these are people that it's very difficult to find and cultivate. These are amazing reporters who had risked so much to do the reporting for RFA, and so it was heartbreaking to see that. So we're very excited now to be rebuilding our editorial content.
That's wonderful that you guys are able to rebuild.
Yeah.
Lisa.
Well, thank you, Olivia and Alexis, for hosting this and for your wonderful paper. It's a pleasure to be here today. So when we, got the email and the news about being defunded, the Trump administration trying to defund Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, the RFE Board of Directors immediately sent a letter to Secretary of State Rubio making the case for RFE. Explaining how it's the most effective and efficient foreign policy tool, one of the most effective and efficient foreign policy tools for advancing America's interests by reporting unbiased, uncensored news in societies that are denied a free press and that, frankly, have a lot of anti-American propaganda. So we noted to the Secretary of State that eliminating RFE would be a gift to authoritarian nations like China, Russia, and Iran, and that this would be detrimental to U.S. national security. However, when it became clear that some in the Trump administration were, committed to seeing our demise, we decided we had no choice but to take our case to court and to argue that it wasn't the executive branch's authority to end our funding because we were, appropriated by Congress, and we still had a lot of support from Congress to continue the mission and doing what we were doing. We, of course, were successful with the court ruling, but it was still very difficult. RFE, RL, like RFA, receives funding on a monthly basis from USAGM, and so there was a lot of uncertainty, a lot of delays in getting that funding. We also had to do a lot of furloughs. We had to let our stringers go, canceling contracts for stringers. So it was a difficult time. And not only were we having delays in getting our funding, USAGM was hurting us in other ways. They were denying RFE access to US government-funded satellites for transmitting our Russian language programming. So they were denying us the ability to use these satellites, which frankly, Putin probably couldn't believe his luck. Putin's been after RFE for many, many years. And so this was something that obviously was detrimental to US national security and US interests. So very, very confusing. And, like RFA, to deal with the funding uncertainty, we tightened our belts. And I want to point out that several senior RFE staff actually took pay cuts for several months to help the organization survive. Can you imagine that? And I think it's because, they believe in the mission, they know it's a noble, good mission that RFE is doing, and so they were willing to accept temporary pay cuts to their own salaries. But we survived. We did, and we are surviving. But my last point would be that, look, we recognize RFE-RL may not be perfect. We recognize there may be opportunities to improve the way we do things, to implement reforms. But we want to work with Congress. We want to work with the administration on making any changes that may be necessary. And it just simply doesn't make sense for the administration to throw out the baby with the bathwater when RFE, RFA are such effective soft power tools for the U.S. government.
Lisa, I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more in response how RFE-RL has responded to the executive order. How has RFE-RL especially fared since the EO went into effect, like in more recent months? How has it been doing?
Well, the focus has been of RFE President Steve Kappas the entire time since March to focus on continuing to get the reporting out, to get the journalism out, to stay on the airwaves. So that has really been the focus, just continuing to try to stay on the airwaves. I think RFE President has also focused on keeping the morale high of the RFE troops, if you will, which has been a challenge. But one big morale boost that happened last spring was the famous American rock band REM, who of course came onto the scene in the 80s because of their hit single Radio Free Europe. They put out a re-release of Radio Free Europe last September, and they have donated all proceeds to the real Radio Free Europe. So that was a morale boost. Also, throughout the spring and even the summer, many people were posting on their social media posts. These are consumers of RFE content. Their support. People relaying stories going back to the Cold War era. And so this, things like this, I think, kind of kept RFE going during the most difficult times. Yeah.
I love that. So similar question to you, Bae. What are some of the biggest impacts of the executive order, and how has RFA responded?
Yeah, it definitely has been difficult. Like I was saying, it was really it was hard to have to scale back editorially and protect our journalists and make sure the people who are on visas were taken care of. We were similar to RFE. We were making the case of how important RFA is to the national security interests of the U.S. We were talking to our stakeholders on the Hill and elsewhere, and we were trying to pivot to, creating content that could still be received by our audiences in Asia, so in an all digital way. But as you mentioned, China came in, swooped up some of our transmissions, increased their broadcasts in Tibetan and Uyghur especially, and it was just very clear how they wanted to fill the space.
Yeah, wow, thank you. To both of you, can you talk a little bit more about how RFA and how RFE-RL really advance U.S. interests? I know you both have said that you guys have been making that case to the administration, to the public too.
Yeah, so I mean, to begin with, just to give a little background, why we were created. We were created after the Tiananmen Square massacre. So a bipartisan group of senators decided that that the U.S. needed to create an unbiased, credible news service to give people in these authoritarian countries around Asia, like in Europe, access to the news of what was happening around them, uncensored news, the stuff that their governments were censoring. And the idea was, it's different from Voice of America's mission, which is to tell America's story. This is not propaganda. This is basically giving people access to the truth of what is happening in their own countries, the idea of surrogate broadcasting. And the idea was that having the citizens of these countries know what was happening was beneficial to democracy and beneficial to U.S. interests. So, what we provide, RFA provides, is like RFE, we are a trusted voice among the people in the authoritarian countries. So, for example, in the first Trump administration, there was a top official who made a speech in Mandarin to reach the Chinese people, and that was something that we broadcast because that was something that would have been censored in their own countries. Likewise, Tibetans are able to get broadcasts from His Holiness the Dalai Lama. In a place where, in a country where, even having a photograph of him, it will get you prosecuted. And then we also look at what our adversaries are doing. I mean, especially over this past year, China is making a huge push to replace U.S. leadership around the world. So just as an example, we had just started about a year before our grant termination letter, we had started a Pacific service. And when I went there I went to Papua New Guinea, and I saw that the Chinese were funding the newsroom of the national broadcaster. They were funding the ability to broadcast digitally. And so as a consequence, all of the news that they were getting was from a Chinese angle, not just about China, but from the news about the world, and that was what we were trying to push back against and trying to provide. And as you know, the Pacific Islands are so strategic to our national security, not just in trade, by access to sea lanes, but also generally in the Indo-Pacific arena.
Yeah, so I'm delighted to give examples of how RFE advances U.S. national security. And I'm not saying this just as the board chair of RFE, okay? I have been a consumer of RFE for the 35 years of my career in national security, and that includes 20 years in the US government, as you talked about. You know, over this time, I have observed firsthand the high quality of journalism. I've met with many RFE journalists. I have seen the difference that RFE makes in societies in where it's being transmitted. So I truly believe that RFE is one of the most effective tools of American soft power. So let me give you some examples. Iran, for example. RFE has a Persian language service, Radio Farda. It reaches normally 6 million Iranians on a daily basis. And it has a particularly strong following among young people and on Instagram. And during the most recent protest in Iran, the Instagram account literally blew up Farda. So, you know, we know that Iranians are listening. They're getting the reporting. You know, as soon as U.S. officials are making statements, President Trump makes a statement where it's being translated, it's getting out to the people of Iran. So that's one example. Also, RFE reporting in Central Asia is helping to fight extremism and terrorism. RFE is the only international broadcaster in the region that reports in all 5 languages of Central Asia, as well as, of course, Russian. And it is helping to blunt the influence of Islamist extremist groups. For example, the Tajik service has provided valuable coverage on issues related to radicalization of Central Asian migrants in Russia and Europe. It's published in-depth investigations of ISIS-related terrorist attacks involving Tajikistani citizens. It's explored things like what impacts youth radicalization. So I could go on and on about the work of RFE. But I also do want to mention the reporting on China's growing influence in the region. And about 10 years ago, it was RFE that broke the story about the first Chinese military base being established in Tajikistan. And I still remember that. I was in the think tank world at that point, but that was very important information. Afghanistan, RFE is one of the few local broadcasters that consistently reports on women and the hardships they're facing, as well as their efforts to try to resist the Taliban. And of course, in Ukraine, RFE is on the front lines reporting on the brutalities of the Russian military. It's reported on the war crimes by Russia systematically deporting Ukrainian children. So, you know, I could go on, but I think it's clear that RFE is contributing to U.S. national security. It is defending the interests of the American people. So it deserves to keep operating. It's a trusted source of information. It has been for 75 years.
Yeah. Thank you both. I want to also ask you both, the budgets for both RFA and RFERL are a drop in the bucket of total U.S. annual spending, but still concerns, of course, have been raised over whether funding RFA and RFERL is actually the best use of taxpayer dollars. How would you respond to these concerns?
Okay. So I want to quote the recently released national security strategy of the second Trump administration. It says, and I'm quoting, "We want to maintain U.S. unrivaled soft power through which we exercise positive influence throughout the world that furthers our interests." RFE and RFA are soft power. And, you know, I want to explain some of the differences between VOA and independent broadcasters like RFA and RFE. Congress put a lot of thought into how it was going to organize international broadcasting. It decided this is an important tool that the U.S. needs, and it's put a lot of thought into how that's organized. VOA, more of a public diplomacy, serves more of that public diplomacy goal, whereas our organizations are surrogate reporters. They're reporting on the local developments in the local languages for the local audiences. And, these components are all necessary for the U.S., getting out its messaging and, influencing, global developments. And, each component is complementary. But I want to point out, because there's been a lot of discussion about the independence debate, that is what makes our organizations credible in these countries. Yes, our reporting is in line with U.S. national security objectives. We're U.S. government funded. But part of how we achieve the U.S. goals is by maintaining our independence. And I just want to point out that, to me, a bad use of taxpayer money is when one U.S.-funded agency denies another U.S.-funded organization access to U.S. government-funded resources, which of course is happening right now. USAGM is denying RFE the use of U.S. government-funded transmission lines into Iran, which makes no sense at all. We should be flooding the information space in Iran right now. And so there's really no good reason for USAGM to deny RFE the ability to communicate and allow the Iranian people's voice to be heard to the outside world.
Yeah, I second everything that you just said. It was very well put. And that's exactly, what we provide to American taxpayers. I think it's a crucial, and as you said, it is it is such a drop in the bucket. I mean, our combined budgets are maybe the cost of, one fighter jet, a small one at that, and the amount, as one of our speakers said earlier, the idea of the information warfare that is going on now is such an important one, and it's something that our adversaries are thinking about every day, and putting more and more resources into. And so, what we do is just it's so important to have that ability.
Yeah, I love that. So, Bae, I wanted to ask you, RFA ended its broadcasting services for the first time in its 30-year history in November. And it's my understanding that you guys have since restarted some broadcasts into North Korea, which is such encouraging news. Maybe there are also some plans to rebuild other services too. Can you speak to those editorial rebuild plans for RFA?
Yeah, we're really excited about it. So we started with our Mandarin service. So as you said, we just paused the broadcasting during the government shutdown for a few weeks, and then immediately started thinking about how we rebuild from a very low base. And we started with Mandarin, which has always been sort of our bread and butter, the original broadcast that we did back when we were founded in 1996 was into China. And then we also started building up our Burmese service because there are crucial elections that are going on, and that started in December. We've also been looking at, as you mentioned, our Korean service. We have reporters based in Seoul now who are on contract, who and we're actually contracting with our own transmissions to get radio broadcasting back into North Korea. So that is with our own funding, because we aren't getting, just like RFE, we aren't getting access to the transmitters that USAGM operates. And then we're also looking at Tibetan and Uyghur, which we're really excited about. One of our Uyghur reporters, who Vice News did a story about him. He was the one who actually started breaking all the stories back in 2017 of the people who are being thrown into these detention camps, and basically raised the alarm bell for all of the world to know about what was happening, the atrocities that were happening there, and so we are excited to slowly build back these different services, and similarly with Korean, we have a couple of defectors who are working with us, and we're trying to do it in an efficient way by building back in the field first, and then also people back here in Washington.
That's great. Lisa, RFERL's origination, of course, goes back to the Cold War, as Vika told us earlier, but that was a much different era than we find ourselves in today. Putin, Lukashenko, and Khamenei are on the move today, cracking down on their peoples. You've discussed this a little bit, but in light of this, why do you believe RFERL is so critical to the present era?
Well, I think we can look at the fact that Russia and China are increasingly cooperating with one another to, undermine the sort of traditional world order that we've known for the last 80 years. They're working with Iran, with North Korea. At CNAS, where I work, we call this the axis of upheaval. The fact that these 4 authoritarian states are increasingly cooperating, working in tandem. So I think the last thing that we would want to do is cede the information space when we still face considerable threats to American interests. So, as you rightly said, RFE was established during the Cold War, and was very effective, I believe, in helping to bring down the Iron Curtain. But it's still a necessary thing. It's still necessary that we are, getting out the truth and reporting, unbiased information, uncensored information in countries and societies where that is denied, and still, engaging with the people. This is about engaging with the people who are living under repressive regimes. And I think, we need all the tools at our disposal to ensure that a lot of these societies don't fall under anti-American propaganda. They don't fall sway to that anti-American propaganda that we know other countries are pushing out. So I think it's still very much a vital mission that the U.S. government needs to have this tool.
Absolutely. Thank you.
To both of you, what can the U.S. government do to keep both RFA and RFERL afloat, whether that's from Congress, the executive branch, or both?
Well, I think Congress has spoken in this appropriation cycle, and I think, while there has been a small cut to all of our funding, I think the fact that they do want to keep us funded shows that they really think that what we're doing is crucial for American interests. And I think, the executive branch can be supportive of that, ensuring that we actually get the funding that's been appropriated to us.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. Well, I agree completely. What Bey is talking about is, of course, the passage of H.R. 7006, which appropriated $643 million to USAGM and includes a table with line items allocating specific amounts for each of the independent international broadcasting organizations. So they have shown that they value our work and what we're doing, and that's important. And I want to take an opportunity to really point out that the Trump administration has made tireless efforts and has been successful in freeing RFE journalists. Bay talked about, the journalists that work for these organizations are putting themselves in danger because they're reporting the truth about, corrupt and authoritarian leaders. And so, this is an ongoing issue that we have. But the Trump administration, just in the past year, has been able to free 4 RFE journalists from Belarus and 1 from Crimea. So I think, this is an amazing accomplishment by the Trump administration. So even, it's a complex situation. Even as we've been fighting for our survival, we have been getting support from the administration in various ways.
That's great.
And to you both, what can civil society, everyday people, do to support RFA and RFERL?
Well, you guys have done it. You're not everyday people. You're very important people. But the report that you both wrote took a lot of research and a lot of initiative, and it was so important. I think for us, helped build up our morale and gave a voice. It's one thing if we talk about why we're important, but it's another when experts like yourselves who are following the regions that we are reporting on, and that, Livia, you've been one of the foremost Asia human rights specialists. So proud of all the work that you do. And so, putting your knowledge and background toward explaining the importance of what we do is really important. But, get out, talk to Congress. If you, are a user of RFE, RFA, tell Congress. Even though we said we have their support, it never hurts to re-emphasize and highlight the importance of our work. I think that's something you can do.
Yeah, I think personal testimonials like the one Hyun-Seung gave were so powerful because it really shows the view from these countries that we try to reach.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, final question. So actually to our audience members, please be thinking up your own questions that you have. But our final question is, what's at stake if RFA and RFERL cease to exist? We hope that's not going to be the case. We're so encouraged by the recent congressional action, but if that were to happen in the future, what's at stake?
What's at stake is the ability to reach people in these countries that are so closed off. People, citizens of countries that are governed by authoritarian governments who try to keep the news from their audiences. Before last March, we reached almost 60 million people on a weekly basis in Asia, and I know RFE has similar numbers. And even just in the time that we have, we've been counting social media engagement in some of our countries, and Burmese, since we've been going back and broadcasting about the elections, we have 15 million followers on Facebook. It's harder to count the numbers in some of our other countries, but we know that the audience is hungry for the content that we all provide.
Yeah, I think we'll lose ground in the great power competition, particularly with China, because I think the vacuum would be filled with their own anti-American propaganda. So again, we're going to see societies that will be more susceptible to that anti-American propaganda because there won't be anything pushing up against that. I think that's one result. And we'll see a world that is increasingly dominated by authoritarian powers. a world where democracy is losing ground. And, I think that, this actually threatens the U.S. It threatens our own way of life, our own democracy if we're seeing, authoritarianism, sweeping across the globe. And, those who are fighting for democracy and human rights in their own countries have no source of getting their voice out, of being heard, of being supported. So I really do think that that's at stake, and these are pretty big, consequential developments. I think the bottom line is the U.S. Cannot isolate itself from the rest of the world. We can't just slash funding and programming for all of our foreign policy tools that we have. We can't do that and expect that we would remain the greatest power on earth. It just won't happen. You cannot maintain that status with military power, fighter jets alone. You need that soft power as well.
That's a great note to end on. Yeah. I'd love to open it up to comments and questions. Actually, only questions. But if you can just give your name and your affiliation and ask a question, that would be great. I think I saw your hand here. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Bronson Shepard. I am an economics student at Arizona State University, and I'm sure I'm not alone in this room of seeing and appreciating the work that you guys are doing to help us live in a safer and more democratic world. So thank you. And what I would really appreciate your insight on is, given how the media ecosystem has totally reformed from a top-down hierarchical system to an open network, how are your organizations adapting to this, and how can you continue to adapt to this in the future? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. We are thinking about that every day, and we try to reach our audiences in all different ways, all different platforms. One of the things that we pointed to when we were figuring out our strategy for editorial is looking at how China tries to reach audiences around the world. So not just censoring its information, inside the country, but also trying to reach Mandarin speakers worldwide. There was a study a few years ago at Purdue University that saw that Chinese graduate students actually became more anti-American the longer they were here. And it was because they were still consuming all of their news through Chinese social media, which is a closed bubble. And so that was one of the things that we tried to address in the programming that we did and the platforms that we created. So we look at all of those different platforms to try to reach our audiences, as well as working with one of our sister grantees, the Open Technology Fund, which their work is to try to get information into closed societies, the sort of technical side of it by helping with VPNs and all of that. So we are constantly consulting on that.
Yeah, we're constantly analyzing the markets and figuring out who the people we want to reach, how they're consuming their news, their information, whether it's social media, Instagram. I explained, Radio Farda does a lot on. It has an Instagram account which has 5 million followers in Iran, or videos. There's a lot of innovative videos that are made, short form videos that are distributed on digital platforms. And so it's really keeping in touch with your market, analyzing, how people are consuming that media, and then serving that market. I think that's really, what we do. And, you have to be ready. And that's why when these protests started in Iran, and all of a sudden, Radio Farda just kind of blew up. A lot of people turned to it. And we have been trying to transmit Radio Farda into the country any way we can. And that's why it's been so frustrating not being able to access some of the U.S. government funded resources that we should be able to. But yeah, I think it takes adaptation, it takes constant research and analysis, and then putting into place what needs to happen. And of course, having people on the ground, there in the countries is very important as well. And yeah, so those are some of the ways that we're trying to keep up with the evolving media environment.
Yeah, Hyun-Seung.
My name is Hyun-Seung. Several months ago, South Korean President Lee said in the public, broadcasting into North Korea is stupid work. People get everything through online. I'm sure he doesn't know there's no internet in North Korea. But he closed all the broadcasting funded by government. Now there's only few civilian work in this field. Now they are monitoring civilian mission broadcasting. And people are worrying, NGOs and operators are worrying about government intervention in this work. That's why I'm emphasizing RFA work is more important, critical than ever. So this topic should be addressed by the U.S. Congress and the U.S. government. So I'm, hoping you guys make a lot of voices to the government and the U.S. Congress. Thank you.
Thank you, Hyun-Seung. Yes. Oh, Ellie. We have one other question.
Hello, I'm Mamajan, and a former Uyghur staff member, Uyghur Service from Radio Free Asia. And thank you, Olivia and Alexis, for writing that powerful article. It was really great, and thank you very much for organizing this event. And first of all, also, thank you very much, Bay, for keeping the RFA alive. Thank you for your leadership, and as well as Lisa for keeping RFE as well, for the Central Asian and other listeners in around the Russian influence. My question is that after the RFA was stopped, stopped Uyghur Service and other services, the effect that we felt was immediate. It's not political, but psychological. For example, Uyghur people living inside the Uyghur region, people may like to call it East Turkestan, and they see America as a kind of beacon of hope. What we lost was, what was at stake was losing that hope, losing the goodness, the greatness, the America that stands for. So right now, that is becoming permanent because we don't see any hope yet. But listening to you that you're planning to bringing the Uyghur voice back was a kind of music to our ears. Thank you very much. Mm-hmm. And that will bring the hope back on. I hope so soon. My question is that if we cannot secure any funds in the future, what you guys thought about finding any kind of alternative way to fund yourselves and ourselves and keep this brand, keep this hope, keep this mission alive? Thank you very much.
So I want to thank Mama John. He is one of the courageous Uyghur reporters that I was talking about, who had family members arrested and thrown in jail for his reporting. So we thank you so much for your service. And that's a very good question. I mean, I think right now we would like to hold on to the hope that we can still get the funding that is appropriated to us, I think there have been there's been thought given to outside sources of funding, but we haven't gotten to that level yet.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the same. We want to be a U.S. government-funded organization. And we're hopeful, particularly now that HR 7006 has passed the House. It goes to the Senate next week, and we're hopeful it will also pass the Senate. So, but I think that said, we have to consider that, were this to happen again, or, this kind of uncertainty, you don't want to lose all the experience that is there, all the journalists that have worked there many, many years, the brand, there's so much that you don't want to lose if, U.S. government funding were to go away. So, this was a scary year. So I think, there is consideration for if we should look at supplementing, having other sources of funding. And of course, many of the European governments and the EU who value RFE work, when they heard we were in trouble, began to pledge that, they would support RFE. So that, that was helpful in that it was a morale boost for us. But I think that, we weren't eager to not be a U.S. government-funded organization. We want, that's what we want to be. So I think, to be prudent, we have to consider and explore if there are other, funding sources that can be there as a kind of a security blanket, if you will. But I think we're hopeful that we will, continue to receive U.S. government funding. Of course, the levels are a bit lower that were appropriated, and we'll have to adjust accordingly. But that's where things stand. We're exploring, we're considering, and we think that's prudent to do given everything that's happened over the last year.
Yeah, I think one of the things too that we noted, Alexis and I did in our report, is that something that really does set RFA and RFERL apart is that you have independent journalism happening, but with the financial backing of the U.S. government, and that is one of their comparative advantages, is being able to have that. So I think ideally things will move forward in a positive way on the Hill, and I think there's good signs so far. So, other questions from audience members? Yes, the gentleman in the front.
Hi, I'm Lucas Farog with the Ukrainian Congress Committee of America. First, Lisa, I'd like to thank you and RFE/RL for your reporting on the abduction and abuse of Ukrainian children. It's super helpful for our advocacy efforts to have real information that's almost impossible to get without your reporting, so thank you. I'd like to ask, how can the West, and America in particular, combat the and contest the information space when our adversaries, such as Russia, spend so much money? Let's assume we get all the funding we want in this appropriations bill. How can we deal with that $1.5 billion of spending?
Well, that's a great question, but I think it really goes back to credibility. And, even though, our budget is, not $1 billion or even close to that, the credibility that RFA, RFE have with the people in the region makes us, more powerful than some of the Russia, funded propaganda. So I think, we have that in our court. And, again, I would just point out that, when you compare how much Russia and China are investing in their own, broadcasting propaganda efforts, that what you see going to organizations like RFA and RFE is really peanuts. But at the same time, we can have more impact because of our credibility and because we are known to report the truth. People want the truth, right? They don't want to be fed lies. Yeah. So that plays in our favor.
Yeah, exactly right. I do think that is a crucial difference, that we actually have credible and authoritative voices in these countries, and China and Russia, even while they put so many resources into reaching these audiences around the world, people recognize that they're being lied to and that this is propaganda. And so that's why it is so important to have this kind of independent journalism.
Yeah, I see. Scott back.
Good morning. My name is Scott Morgan. I have two quick questions. First is for May. Hearing about your future plans for the re-expansion of Radio Free Asia, one country which I did not hear about is actually Myanmar. So,
Yeah.
and that RFA has always been an excellent source of information regarding the actions of the junta and the conflict there. How quickly will that be resuming? And one for Lisa, another part of the region where we generally don't hear about, the tensions are still simmering in the Balkans, specifically not just Ukraine, but also Moldova, also Bosnia and Herzegovina. RFE has been a good source of information. So how soon will you get back into the Balkans?
Just to speak to Myanmar, so I did actually mention that our Burmese reporting was one of the first that we restored. We brought back Burmese reporting on the ground, and are actually able to broadcast there, with our own transmissions that we've contracted with. So that has been really great. We've gotten a lot of feedback, both through social media and from people on the ground. So yeah.
Yeah, to my knowledge, and I know an RFE colleague is here. Since I'm not the president, I'm not in charge of operations, I may not have all the information. To my knowledge, we have not stopped reporting in the Balkans and Moldova. So I think that continues. And thank you for acknowledging how important that is. The only place, the administration has mandated that we close down the Hungarian service. So that's the only change that has happened in the last, in the last year.
Thank you for that. I know I saw a question over here. Oh, sorry. Can you wait for a minute?
Thank you. Firstly, I have to say thanks to Radio Free Asia, Radio Free Europe, and Radio Liberty. And as a member of one small nation ignored by the whole world, the Kazakh. Mm-hmm. And they have one problem, a very urgent problem. After the Chinese Communist Party began to mass arrest the Uyghurs and the Kazakhs and the Kyrgyz people, and we began to find that the Radio Free Asia is very important to us. And since 2017, I began to write Radio Free Asia, the Chinese Mandarin section. And one day, the journalist Chao Long answered me. After I wrote maybe 20 or 50 letters, I didn't remember. I write the whole world because that I have around 500,000 Kazakhs arrested in Xinjiang. And it's a big mass arresting after the World War II, the genocide made by German fascists to the Jewish people and Gypsy people. And so I know it is very important. And the Chao Long reported, I don't know, maybe more than 1,000 times. And the huge amounts of evidence, facts, reported by Radio Free Asia Mandarin section. And unfortunately, they have one radio called the Radio Azatek in Radio Liberty section, in Kazakh section. They reported also, I have to say, thanks to the Kazakh section of Radio Liberty, Azatek. But as a very unfortunate people like Kazakh, we have three evil neighbors, Russia, China, and Iran. The whole world's three ex-evil countries is our neighbors. So sometimes Radio Azatek, maybe they are surviving. Maybe their families are under the threat of the Kazakh dictatorship authority. So sometimes they don't report us. If we have 100 facts, evidence about Chinese concentration camps in Xinjiang, and doesn't maybe report 1 or 2 or 3, but Mandarin section reported the most of them. And they'll have also Radio Free Asia's Uyghur section, but they works very good and they focused on Uyghurs. But we are also the Kazakh people. And by the Chinese governmental official stats, we have 1.5 million. But the people believe we are more than 1.5 million. We are the second largest group in Xinjiang, except Uyghurs.
Sorry, sir. Do you have a question?
I have a question that could American side or Radio Free Asia or American Congress continue to supporting Radio Free Asia, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty? And could you pay attention to Kazakhstan, the Kazakh minority? For example, tomorrow, the 23 January, 19 members of my human rights organization, Atajut Kazakh Human Rights Organization, their court hearing all began at Kazakhstan. And these 19 members, they are the members of Atajut Kazakh Human Rights Organization, and they collected more than 10,000 video testimony about Chinese concentration camps, 10,000 video testimony. And that kind of huge evidence, no one organization collected before that. We rescued more than 90% of eyewitness of Xinjiang concentration camps. We did this huge work, but we ignored by the whole world. Sometimes Radio Azatik, they'll have 2 facts.
Sorry, sir.
One second. They'll have 2 facts about concentration camps. One big as big dinosaur, second the small as small mosquito or fly. They always focus on the small ones. So we wish the whole world pay attention to us. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh. Thanks. Did you either of you want to comment on that?
Well, I would just say, thank you for raising, the Kazakh ethnic population in the Uyghur region. Was very aware of this when I was at the National Security Council, and we were hearing the stories of what was happening in the camps from ethnic Kazakhs, many of whom returned to Kazakhstan. And so, I think, appreciate you raising that, reminding us of the many ethnic Kazakhs who are in the region. And, we did value the reporting and the information that they were bringing out about what was happening in those camps. Being able to do that safely once they were in Kazakhstan.
Yeah, I also appreciate your bringing it up. I know both our Uyghur and our Mandarin services were doing a lot of work about the Kazakhs.
That's great. Well, thank you everybody so much for joining us today. Would you please join me in thanking our wonderful panelists? On your way out, please grab copies of the report, and also through the generous support of the McCain Institute, we have lunch to offer. So please help yourself, and thank you so much. It's wonderful to see so many faces, familiar and new, who are supporters of RFA and RFE. So thank you. Yeah.